And good evening and welcome to this webinar where we're going to look at the implications of the American election on the relationship between the dollar and the euro, especially tonight, the toings and froings, and look at the picture going into 2025. And here to talk to us about that is Sarah Davey of Spartan FX. Good evening to you, Sarah.
Good evening, Benoit. I've had my dinner. Does that mean I can say Benoit? I think that's how
Yes, you
that works.
can. You can. Very good. Excellent stuff there. You were definitely watching with Philomena, weren't you, when she told us about that? Good stuff. And we will be talking to Philomena again for our Christmas party, which is upcoming soon. More details about that and the Dream Team, of course, later at 9 o'clock. So let's get started. There has been, in case anyone missed it, there has been an election, right, in the United States, hasn't there, Sarah? And there's obviously with any election, there's a mixture of responses, positive and negative. There's certainly been reaction that has changed the strength of the dollar around the world. Can we start by saying a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said it before, election times generally do cause a lot of volatility because it's very, obviously markets can try and predict what's going to happen, but really it's often sometimes down to the wire exactly who's going to win and then how it impacts, because it's not just what happens if that person gets in, then it's thinking about, which is what we'll talk on, is what are their policies, what sort of things are they going to start putting into place, and the market sort of starts to sort of prepare for that a little bit, thinking, well, this candidate gets in, these are the sort of things they'll perhaps look to do or what they've been talking about. And then obviously that's what we're watching as we go into 2025 as to what they implement, how quickly they do it, and what the knock-on effect is. But certainly when we saw Trump get in, if you were selling US dollars and buying euros, instantly we saw about a 2% difference. So on buying 250,000 euros, that was nearly 6,000 US dollars cheaper to buy your euros just as soon as we saw that Trump won. So we saw volatility straight away on the day.
That's very
And now
significant, isn't it?
we're starting to see more at the moment.
Yes, amazing. Thank you for your comment there, Jose Cruz. I think I will summarize that as volatility, if I may.
Yes.
And we might expect more of that going forward, as people might say. There's talk of tariffs, obviously ongoing wars in the world. Can you bring together the kind of global picture before we go into the mechanics of buying currency with you, setting up the free account, and some of the practical pitfalls that people can avoid? So yeah, let's stay with the US picture, if we may, and the relationship of the US with the rest of the world.
Absolutely, because what moves the markets generally are market data that's actually coming out. So sort of, as we've talked before, inflation data. We've got things like, for example, interest rates. We've got sentiment. So that comes with sort of comments that the Fed will make after they've made their interest rate decisions to give an indication of what they might do next. Then obviously we've got the likes of Trump that comes out and says what he thinks he's going to do. And the market reacts on the back of that, and that's just him talking and not actually physically doing anything. Then we've obviously got wars, we've had pandemics before, which is where we saw a lot of volatility again with the exchange rate. And it isn't just solely what's happening in America. Obviously, you're moving to Portugal, so we're looking at the euro. What is the ECB doing? What are they doing with interest rates? What's happening with their economy? They're all related, especially when we'll talk about tariffs in a minute, because Trump's going to put an increase on the goods that are coming from Europe, so that'll have an effect on them. And then
Well,
just
yeah,
the
not just
global
China, Europe
economy.
as well, of
Yeah,
course. Yes, yes. Sorry to
absolutely.
interrupt. Yeah, yeah.
So again, it's how it's affecting the global economy. And again, sort of, whether the exports coming from the US, is it more expensive? So everything does relate together as well, just not just the US on its own.
Any questions you've got, please pop them in the chat as well as your comments. Happy to take those. The dollar has always traditionally been seen as a safe haven currency, Sarah. However, and this is all speculation because that's all we can do, right? I mean, if we had crystal balls, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But the dollar's been seen as a safe haven currency. Perhaps the more isolationist approach that Trump might adopt could change that a little bit. Is that a possibility?
Well, I think that is one of the key points that will move the US dollar going forward, is that generally whenever there's unrest and the markets are a bit jittery or unsure about things, then they'll invest in the US dollar, which is a safe haven. So generally when war breaks out, they've gone into the safe haven. So we're talking about obviously Trump's relationship with Putin and talking about any sort of ceasefires and things like that, then they may pull out of the safe haven currencies for those sort of reasons. Now, the thing with Trump is obviously there's certain things he wants to do, but he is a little bit of a loose cannon. So the markets might feel a little bit sort of scared on a few things and then go into the US dollar as a safe haven.
Right. Okay. So volatility definitely the key word, and it can go any number of ways given his character,
Yes.
personality. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Anything else you want to say about tariffs or world trade and the Trump effect before we get into some of the practicalities?
Yeah, so I think that the challenge obviously for everyone is that it's sort of almost push and pull effect. So
Mm,
some things will be positive if we look at one way, but then the other way could have a knock-on effect. So for example, obviously he wants to increase tariffs 60% for China, and I think it's 10% for Europe. The ultimate goal, I think, in his head is a good one. He wants Americans to produce more in America and try and help the US economy and bring it all back, which is a great thing to do. But that's going to take time to build that up and obviously get new companies set up or to make those things to
mm,
replace the imports that are coming in. And in the meantime, even though he's leveraging the tariffs on that side, the problem is it's going to make it more expensive because say you're in Europe and you were exporting into the US, it's going to cost you more to do that, then you might put your prices up. So I think
mhm.
ultimately what could happen is that actually the American people might end up having to pay more for some of these goods, which
Right.
then the knock-on effect is that could increase inflation. So then the Fed may need to increase interest rates,
Yes.
which then could strengthen the US dollar. But on the other side, Trump does want to cut interest rates because that would be
Yeah.
good for the economy. So
Yes. And there is a problem
the
with
sort
the
of
dollar being
challenge
too
there.
strong, isn't it? I guess it's a kind of a proud moment when the dollar's very strong in the world, but that does affect world trade and these deals that we're talking about.
Yeah. And the other thing as well is some of these things will strengthen the US dollar. And yes, we saw parity in 2022, but we've got to bear in mind that was a pandemic. So quite an
Yeah.
extreme situation as well. And if the dollar gets too strong, or any currency gets too strong, governments, will step in because that's going to make their exports more expensive. So
Mm.
again, while that's good for you, it's maybe not so good for exports. And as I said, Trump really does want to cut interest rates because that would be better for the economy.
Yes.
And that could weaken the US dollar as well.
Okay. Well, all to be seen. A lot of people waiting and seeing what will happen in January. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to the global picture, the United States picture, before we go into the process of working with Spartan.
I think it's just, as I said, looking at the things that he wants to do. Some of the things he needs to do will increase spending, but as long as what happens if he increases spending, but then he doesn't increase the taxes to cover that,
Yeah.
then the markets might get a bit unsure about where that money's coming from, and then there's a deficit, which is then a negative. So, as I said, there's positives some ways, but then negatives in other ways. So that's kind of what we're looking at and monitoring the rates. But I think we will see quite a lot of volatility, maybe big swings in both directions.
Yes, and edge of the seat stuff, I think, going into the new year. People will be glad, glad of a Christmas break, this sort of somewhat quiet period between Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year. And then we'll be going into the new year with much anticipation to see how the things you talked about will actually affect us in our pockets, wallets, purses, of course, because that's what really matters, doesn't it, to the individual. Today, I mean, at the moment, things are looking pretty good, aren't there? There's a kind of pre moving into the White House moment, post election, pre moving into the White House. We're in quite a sweet spot at the moment, are we not, in terms of
Well,
the
we
value?
are
Yeah.
definitely. So, I mean, that's the other thing that we tend to look at is not just a sort of what's happening this week, what's happening last week, what's happened in the last month, but we look at rates historically. So, if we look at rates historically, as I said, apart from 2022, we're probably at 22-year highs for selling your US dollars and buying euros. So we're still at very good levels. Even if you bought earlier in the year, we were still at 3-year highs. So this is the sort of thing that we're looking at for customers, is what is the exchange rate now compared to where it was before? Are these good levels? And they are. So if you're buying your euros now, even if it did move even further in your favor, you've still bought at a very good level. And often the key thing is really just thinking about your budgets. A lot of people I speak to, especially when you're thinking about moving to Portugal, it doesn't happen overnight as we wish it would. We wish it would.
Yes, as we've
But it
observed.
takes time. It can take, from the decision of making the move to going through all the process and getting here, it can take 12 months. I mean, a lot of people are investigating this 2 years before they need to move. So it depends on your time frame, but within that time frame, when you actually need to actually really move money, there's no harm in looking at it in advance, because you could be buying your euros now and taking advantage of a good rate, and then
Yes.
how much the move's going to cost you, or if you're thinking about buying property, how much the property is going to cost you, and just helps you control your budget, because I know myself, you budget for something and it will be more expensive.
Funny, that's how budgets seem to work, isn't it? Right. Okay. Good stuff. And yes, so to answer your question, I think you should say it looks like it will be a roller coaster ride, I think, with erratic and to some nonsensical behavior. And yes, I think that question or comment has just come in from Craig and Teresa here. Is now a good point to move the dollar to euro historically? I think that's basically what you were saying, right? In historical
Yeah, I
terms.
mean, I don't know. Can I share my screen? Let's
Yeah,
see.
yeah, give it a go. See what you
Yes,
can do there with the
mm,
graph. We do like it when you show a graph, Sarah. And
mm.
a good moment to remind everybody to get questions into the chat. Good evening to you on YouTube if you're watching over there as well. And we'll do the same again for the Dream Team session, which happens in about an hour and a quarter from now. So the Dream Team members, Thanksgiving special this evening. And good on you if you're having your Thanksgiving dinner and keeping an eye on this and learning more about currency this evening. Let's see how. Oh, yes, Sarah, you've got your graph up there. Fantastic. Okay, I see that dip you're
See that?
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is we're looking really at a 5-year graph of selling US dollars and buying euros. The dot is where we are today. So if you look at that, as I said, it's still pretty good levels to be selling your US dollars and buying euros. As I said, we dipped further down, sort of close, obviously below parity in 2022, which is on the back of the pandemic. But we're still at very good levels, as you can see.
Okay, thank you for that. Good. Right, so we can move on then to the actual process, the practicalities of opening an account with you. And like you said, you don't have to wait, do you? You don't have to think, okay, I'm buying my house in 6 months or a year's time, I'll change my currency then. You can do that, but if you want to take advantage of better rates in the meantime, you can do that and you can get in touch with Spartan and open up a free account with you. How easy is it to do that?
It's completely free to open an account. It carries no obligation to use us, but I always say put yourself in a good position doing the preparation now, speak to the team, because then you can get to know us and we can get to know your situation. What are your time frames? What money have you got available? And then if you're not in a position, perhaps it's too early and you're just considering the move, we can just keep in contact with you. Or if you're further along the way, as you said, some clients are buying a quarter of what they need and then buying a quarter again, and it may spread your risk a little bit.
And you've got to do what's right for you personally. We're taking a look at the big world picture, but obviously, what really matters is your own personal circumstances. When you open your account, you can then get into a conversation, can't you, with your broker, who can alert you to some of the scenario, or who can, if you put scenarios to them, they can give you some insight on what is likely to happen and what the best move is to make at any given time. But ultimately, the decision will be down to you personally, right?
Absolutely. And as I said, we can, if you've got a longer time frame and you're not quite ready, we can keep an eye on the rate. And what we normally do is we contact customers when we see it's moving in their favor, but then equally we'll contact you when we see it's moving against you, because again, that impacts you. So say, for example, you needed to make a payment or wanted to transfer in, say, a month's time, and now we saw the rate starting to move against you, we would contact you at that point as well, because it may be worthwhile exchanging your money before it gets worse. But again, when I say it's in your time frame, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yes, and as you said before, sooner rather than later, it's never too soon to open an account, is it, and be in a position to make those deals, those trades. Sometimes some of the pitfalls and difficulties come on the other side of the water, don't they? In terms of how people's banks behave in the face of changing dollars into euros. What are some of the things that can happen there, and how do you avoid that?
Well, I think that the challenge is that, and we're all guilty of it, that people don't think about this in advance because it's lower on the list to everything else that you do. And I know myself, moving country, and it's when somebody says, "Oh, you need to pay this invoice for my fee," or "I'm buying a property, right? You need to pay by this date." All right, okay, I need to make this payment. And that's when you're thinking about it. But it's literally, I need to make the payment by the end of the week, or it's now that you're making it. Whereas we're trying to encourage you to think about this before that actually happens. And
Yes.
then other times you might find that, you're moving some small amounts and you're in America and it's gone fine, no problems. But then you've come over to Portugal and then you need to sign a document or there's more authorization, you need to come in branch and you're not in the country. You need
Hmm.
to, especially around sort of larger sums of money. Now, especially on the back, I think, of COVID, there is unfortunately more fraud around. So the banks are tightening up and there's more things perhaps in place, compliance, but also around authorization of moving money. And it may be that, you've come over here on an inspection trip, you've found a property, you want to put a deposit down, and all of a sudden your bank won't make an international payment, or your bank has a limit on how much you can do each day or each month. We had a
Hmm.
client who trying to buy a property, their bank has a limit on, I think it's 70,000 US dollars every 30 days, and they're trying to buy a property. It would take them a good few months to do that. Or
Yeah, so even if they could buy the house in 6 weeks, as we see with the best case scenarios, it would take him a year if it was 840,000, I think. Yes, wow. Okay. So that would be quite an encumbrance to the process.
I mean, even, my online banking in the UK, I think has a limit on 10,000 pounds every day.
Yes.
So again, if you're buying a property, you need to make a transfer every day for 2 weeks, perhaps,
What do you
which
do
is
then? Can
fine.
you speak to the bank to make a bigger chunk flow more freely, or do you just have to factor that in?
Well, it depends. I mean, you can maybe speak to your bank beforehand and increase that, or as I said, there may be other things that you can do to make bigger transfers. But again, what's the process with your bank?
Yeah.
Do you need an international card reader? Do you need to sign any paperwork? I think Charles Schwab, you have to fill in a form that we've helped clients fill in. So again, this is what I'm talking about preparation. It isn't always about necessarily to use our service and for you to actually make the exchange, but just having a conversation or an investigating with your bank or speak to us. We're quite knowledgeable on the different banks in America. We can probably tell you what you need,
Yeah.
and there's things that you can put in place which would avoid you having to fly back to your bank or whatever's needed to be done.
Yes, and brief your bank on something called the IBAN, which is the account number here in Portugal, isn't it? Which, understandably, some people have never heard of in the United States when they're confronted with that. And so that's something that we need to know a little bit more about. And what are those differences then that might come up? What is the IBAN, and what other kind of details and numbers do people need to make the mechanical transfer, if you like?
Well, it's funny because someone was asking me this today about sort of how do I find Portuguese banking? Do we find it slow and this, that, and, compared to like UK banking or American banking, all this sort of stuff. And I was like, to be honest, I'm still quite surprised with the US banking system when I speak to certain clients how it's not as far forward as I thought it would be. But
Yeah.
it also depends on, because she says, what's the service like? I said, really, it depends on what state you live in and the people in the branch
Yes.
ultimately. Because what we find is, two clients, they bank with the same bank, but they live in a different state, so they have different charges. You go into the bank, and some people will be more knowledgeable than others. Others have never made an international transfer before and don't know how to really do it. They might ask you more questions that you don't know quite how to answer. It's things like that. Again, it varies from branch to branch, to be honest.
So what might be a really pleasing and exciting experience for you in America? I want to transfer some money to Portugal. Could be a terrifying experience for the bank teller on the other side who's never done anything like that before.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And what is this IBAN thing? Briefly, that is the long number, isn't it? And usually begins with PT or a country prefix.
But again, like obviously use Spartan for my own transfers.
We're
But
glad to hear that.
but I have Steve, which you've probably met on, he's
Yeah.
on the Dream Team show. He'll be on next week actually. I use Steve, I call him up and he does it for me because when I was in, now it's a bit easier, but when I was in the throes of moving, it was very stressful. I had so much going on. My concern was that my head was a bit fuzzy. Just putting the I-band in, I'd probably get a digit wrong, to be honest. So it was just
Yes.
easier to get someone else to do it for me.
There are a lot of numbers that could possibly go wrong. Now, talking of which, it's advisable to do a test payment, which you can do, right? I mean, this is potentially a lot of money we're talking about when you push the button and hope for the best. So it's quite a useful safety measure, is it not, to do a test payment, and you can
Yes,
manage that for people.
yes. I mean, I do that myself, even for small. I just test it. Is that the right amount? I mean, here in Portugal, with the Portuguese bank to a Portuguese bank, so just euro to euro, so there's no need for our service. They have this what they call MB Way, where you put in someone's telephone number and you can send them a payment. I mean, it makes it so easy, but the number of times I speak to people and they've sent them payments to the wrong people is a lot. So
Yes.
sometimes I send a small payment, but again, we're talking about moving money internationally. You might be sending it to an account that you've never paid to before, especially if it's a large sum of money for maybe a house purchase. Let's do a small test payment and just make sure that it goes through, it's the right account. And we always ring and check the beneficiary account details as well. I mentioned it briefly at the start. There is unfortunately more fraud about in the world, and they're getting smarter and cleverer. And when you see the emails and the things, it's frightening. So it's always worthwhile ringing and checking that beneficiary, because if it comes, say, an email from your lawyer, it could have been intercepted, not necessarily just at their point. Your email address could be compromised, um, or there's an error, just human
Yes.
error. Someone's written it down wrong when they've sent the email. So it's always worthwhile just checking the beneficiary account details are correct.
It can be up to 34 alphanumeric characters in an IBAN number. So there's quite a lot of room for mistake, human error. Let's call it that in the
Yes.
mix there. We've got a question from Matthew, and of course, there are other platforms that provide this service, and we want to talk to you about what's special about Spartan. And we often get people in our community here who will answer that question on your behalf and say what a great relationship you have with clients, how friendly the service is. So we'll come back to that, Matthew. Just want to ask you about any more about the processes, test payments, compliance, any other practicalities of pitfalls that can be avoided, Sarah.
I think the compliance side of things and bank clearing time. So, if you were just using your bank, banks can take a good week for the money to clear. The other side of the coin, what happens is that money sent from one bank to another, and the beneficiary bank could stop the payment and ask questions. So then the process would be that beneficiary bank, so say your bank in Portugal, will then send a message to the bank that sent the money to ask them more questions. Now you can imagine if it's a Portuguese bank speaking to a US bank, that's almost might as well be snail mail, very slow process.
Yeah,
Or for some online providers, their policy is we'll get back to you in 5 working days, or things like that. So that can take time, especially if you need your money by a certain point, or just the stress of where is my money.
yeah.
So when we get notified, or the bank contacts us because we've sent the money, we have the information and we can act quite quickly to send what they need to get that money released.
Very good. Okay. Anything else with those practicalities and pitfalls to be avoided before we move on to what's so special about Spartan?
We do a lot of the compliance up front. There is more compliance needed these days on sort of anything really over 10,000, or if you're doing smaller amounts more regularly, companies need to be doing the checks on people. So we try and do a lot of that up front to avoid any payment delays. That's ultimately it. We're trying to not just get you the best price or help with the exchange rate movements, but it's about trying to get your money there as quickly as possible. And
Yes.
peace of mind, you know where it is. We've got extra tracking, so we have that on the payment. We can tell you where the money is, and we can tell you when it's been put in the beneficiary account, which is sometimes quite good when you're sending to third parties. The process of buying a property in Portugal, sometimes the money's sent to a lawyer, but sometimes it's sent to the seller.
Yes.
So again, just that peace of mind that you know that that money is in their account.
And you can tell them so.
Yeah, it's not there. Oh yes, it is.
Yes, I'm reliably informed it is
It is.
actually.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's great. So 5 stars on FIFO. People love you. Platinum Service Award. I mean, I think it's fair to say that's the key differentiator with Spartan. It's the personal service, right?
It is just being able to speak to somebody, I think is really key because, it is your money. As I said, and I think it just gives reassurance. How would when you're talking about, I see it with a lot of Americans and other clients, they have financial advisors to manage their money,
Hmm.
investments, and trying to get as much for their money as possible. This really is no different. We're dealing with your money. We're giving you guidance on the best strategies to get it from the US to Portugal.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Okay. And yeah, as I said before, you'll be working with the team, the Spartan FX team, and a named person, which you don't always get, do you? When with some of the card-based currency swapping systems, you're talking to people, and that can be very reassuring, especially when you've got these big sums of money moving around, and if you want a little bit of insight into what's going on, and yeah, and professional help, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, sometimes it's a case of, if we know your situation, there are bank cut-off times. Everybody has that, banks, other providers, ourselves. But
Mm.
if we know that your payment, not that, I mean, everybody is a priority, but if specifically we know that you specifically need your money there by a certain time, there
Yeah.
may be things we can step in and try and get that money pushed through as quickly as possible to meet those
Not all
deadlines.
currency conversion companies can say that, can they? And work in that way. So that's great to know. Excellent. Okay, and there will be a chance if you want to ask questions that aren't being recorded in a more intimate environment. I'm sure Sarah will stick around after the main presentation here in the conversation we're having, and we'll shut down the YouTube live stream. We'll come
Oh,
back
I've
to you.
got one more before you shut down,
Oh,
one
I'm
more
not
thing.
finishing yet. I'm not
Oh,
finishing yet. I just wanted to let everybody know that there will be a chance to ask other questions that in a non-recorded, non-live streaming space if people feel more comfortable with that. No, go ahead, Sarah, because you had a bit of housing market insight for us as well, didn't you?
I did. Now I did this last year, and I'd forgotten I did it, and someone was talking about the other day. I thought, oh, I'll just have another look because last year, I mean, even this year, people talk about it a lot. That they talk about the housing prices in Portugal. Are they going up? Should I be buying a property now, or should I wait? I mean, that's not our area of expertise, or is ask an expert, but looking at the index that shows the housing prices, that actually it's gone up by X%, but what's the exchange rate? People don't factor that in. So I think it was last year, the exchange rate moved so much that it actually negated those house price
Oh,
indexes.
the changes in the housing market. Right,
Yeah.
okay,
So I
yeah.
had a quick look at this year, and I think the figures are out for quarter 2. They said that the house price in Portugal for quarter 2 of 2024 has increased by 7.8% compared to the previous quarter. Now, I'm sure that the caveat of that is whether it takes into consideration, I think, the whole of Portugal, and obviously probably differs from areas like Lisbon, probably is different, obviously, from more rural areas. So as I said, we can share the link and you can investigate that a little bit more. But 7.8%. Now, if we compare the high of Q1, so quarter 1, and the low of quarter 2, the exchange rate, there was nearly a 4% difference. I think it was 3.75%.
Yep.
So on a well, straight away in the exchange rate difference on a 250,000 euro property, that's a difference of just over 10,000 US dollars. So
Considerable, isn't it? Yep.
between the quarters, that's the difference of what you would be. It's either more expensive, obviously, or cheaper.
You get a lot of
But
pastel donatas for 10 grand.
exactly.
Yes.
But really, then the house prices have really only gone up about 4% if you're
Yes.
an American and you're buying euros.
Yes. Yep. Okay, good to know.
So
So
that
yes,
can
a rich
help.
picture. Yep, very good. Okay. And that's the sort of thing again you can check with your Spartan FX broker, with the person who's helping you with your account, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay. In terms of safety, then, backed by a secure underwriting. Tell us more about the security of Spartan FX and the safe transfer of money, and whilst it's being held with Spartan.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of the back end system is a company called Currency Cloud, which are owned by Visa. So you'll know that name very well.
Mm.
We have all the licensing in place that we need. So, like in the UK, it's the FCA, and then in America, it's FinCEN, and we have the money transmitter licenses in all the states in America. So we have all the correct licensing we need. You know, some places in the world you don't need anything, but where we do, we have it. So you've got that. Also, the money is in named accounts, or they're in your name. And the way that the accounts are set up, they're fully protected. The whole 100%. Normally is about up to about £85,000 or equivalent. But all the money is protected. So if anything should happen to us as a company and we were holding your money, you'd get all your money back first and foremost.
Great. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Because sometimes it's only partially covered, isn't it? But a whole
Yeah.
100% with you there. Anything else you'd like to add before we will conclude on this part of the evening, Sarah?
So I've talked about how we can hold euros in advance, so that's quite good if you haven't got a Portuguese bank account open. If you have, obviously you can still use us and we'll just put the money there. The other thing that we can do, which is quite good for property purchases, and also if you didn't want to put all the money up front, maybe you've got your money earning in higher interest rate account in the US. We've got the facility where you can fix the rate for a future date. We would only need a 10% deposit. It's not a cost or a charge, but it's because we buy all the currency up front. And then when you need the money, you pay us the remaining 90% and we send it all out at that point, but it's on the rate that you've agreed.
Great.
So, for example, if you're buying a property and it completes in, as I said, 12 weeks' time, you could secure the rate today for that future payment. The flexibility is that obviously if your dates change, we can draw down or roll it on. You are fixed into the rate regardless of any exchange rate movement. So again, it's a budgeting tool, or you're fixing in potentially to a good rate of exchange. But as I said, it's another option, and it just means you only give us 10% up front if you have it in a high interest rate account.
Very good. Good to know. Okay, I'm putting a couple of links into the chat now. If you want to connect with Spartan straight away and start the process of opening an account, that's there for you. And there's also a free guide available if you'd like to know a bit more information and be reminded of some of the things that Sarah shared with you this evening. Unless there's anything else to share, Sarah, I'll stop the live stream to YouTube. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't think anything else. I think if anything, the key thing is really just thinking about this sooner than you perhaps would have. That's the thing I would say, whether it just be speaking to your bank to see what the process is, or just having a chat with us. As I said, it's free, just to see what your situation is and what we can offer. Never too early. A lot of customers that I speak to that, we do the meetups, and they've moved here. The one thing that they do say is, wish I'd thought about this,
Yes.
is they wish that they'd thought more about money transfer and taxes. So they
Yes.
say they look into it, but not as much as they should have.
Yeah, that it's like the assumption is that can wait, right? Doesn't I'll deal with that when I come to it because there are seemingly more important things. But yeah, sooner the better. So thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks for being with us. Just stopping the live stream over to YouTube and also pause the recording here on Zoom as well.